Rowan,
okay, well, I have to say, when Francis asked me to do this a few months ago, he said there'll be about 40 people in the room. And timing is everything. But, and I was pretty daunted, as anyone would be. And then in the last hour, he's made it so much easier, because he invited two fabulous speakers before me who have far better encapsulated, Margarita, the challenges, the needs, but the opportunities, and Ed, the route towards a solution. It's not just technical, but about communications, collaborations, community. So they've made the key pillars of what I was going to say so much more reinforced and made my life easier. But of course I'm now daunted again, because each in their own way, they were fabulous contributions, and now I feel something of a... I'm going to have to really do my best to keep the crescendo where it is. But here we go. This has been an absolutely fabulous event. I think I can speak for us all in that regard. It has been by far the best organised and most enriching meeting I've ever been at. And that includes the ones I organised myself. It was tagged, if you remember, way back when you signed up to come here, for free incidentally. I mean, not often such good quality comes at such a good price. It was tagged as innovation in disaster risk assessment. Well, let's be very clear. It hasn't just been about that at all, has it? It's been innovation in risk-taking in event management. And we've had the website for a start. We've had the tweets. We've had the Ignite, which is an excellent way to get over jet lag, I hasten to add, for those of you who are around, and all the rest. And I have to say, I thought, this is a bit brave, and we all know what that means. And yet it all came off. And yet it came off when the leaders of this project were a little bit busy, because they look after Latin America and the Caribbean, in Haiti. And I think to have pulled this off is an absolutely remarkable achievement. But not just pull it off, do it in such style. You see, I wonder, I mean, Ed talked about the brochure. Never have I seen such an elegant shaped notebook. Am I going to say? I've been wondering today, actually the whole week, whether I've actually been attending a meeting or a forum, or I'm actually beginning to join a movement, or I'm actually now part of a brand, or I'm actually really subsuming myself into a new sort of lifestyle choice, or even a state of mind. Because I'm pretty sure what it is you're seeking to do. But all I know is the black market price for those orange polo shirts. But of course, the next year it'll be UR by Francis. This is going to become a big thing. Anyway, we've all learned a great deal. I confess I came to this event feeling I was reasonably on the inside track of some of this stuff, and what I didn't know about, I had sufficient hidden shallows. Well, you just had to read the titles of the sessions in the brochures for me to realise I had mass landscapes of ignorance when it came to topics such as, the crowdsourcing topics or sub-regional tools for for national investment planning. I realised I had a lot to learn. But I also picked up a few other very important pieces of understanding risk today. For those of us who were lucky enough to be in the flood session, how can we forget Tom Gretzio's contribution from the National Weather Service as he announced the new slogan and programme to prevent the large number of deaths by US drivers who try and navigate roads which are about to be flooded by rivers. Turn around, don't drown. I will not go driving in a storm again without thinking of Tom Gretzio. And it could just save my life. Also, and this is important, David Ropiek, in the risk communications section, he said that when you're asked a question in an audience, as I could ask one right now, and you're picked out, you have the same feelings of fear you have when you're confronted by a snake. Well, yes, we all feel that, but why? The reason we have that sense of fear is because we fear that we will be, quote, rejected by the tribe. And rejection by the tribe can be as fatal as being bitten by a snake. David, has anyone been rejected by the tribe? Just kidding, just kidding. Right. But actually, one thing we could all be sure about when we came here is that we weren't going to suffer from abandonment and isolation, which is, of course, the big fear that we all have. And we knew that because we have the most rich and fecund arrangement of people brought here by the immense convening power of the bank. The bank. I did say the bank. Not a bank, the bank. But also, you know, it's always fascinating when you deal with people who are lucky enough to work with the World Bank, and I haven't really yet, but they always just say, that Charles Scawthorne says, oh, I was at the bank. And he's not making a deposit, he's come to Washington. Anyway, there we go. So, you get what I mean. So, we've got the convening power of the bank, but remarkable, rich content, and a clearly vital motive to be here. But my challenge is, how can I possibly try and summarize in the few minutes that I have what's been discussed and what's been spoken about? I think there are 100 speakers, and we've all picked up an awful lot. But I will beg your forgiveness for errors and omissions, but what I am going to try and do is amplify some of the themes that actually Margarita and Ed so eloquently and visually provided. But I'm going to go back to the beginning of why we're here. Do you remember the focus of this event was innovation in disaster risk assessment? Not invention, innovation, which means actually making things happen and doing things. And not just technical innovation, but innovation in terms of institutional innovation, cultural innovation, and indeed financial innovation. And that's what we're going to need to overcome the challenges we have. And then it was about focusing on best practices, technological developments, and the benefits of inclusive partnerships. Now, I feel pretty confident that this event has achieved in enriching all of us with all sorts of examples of that, of not just theory, but actually practice. Sometimes it's practice occurring in relatively small scale, but we can all see where those things can move when they're accelerated by the power of modern communications. But I'm going to come back to the questions we were posed, or the event posed. What is risk? Can we measure it? If we can understand it, can we manage it better? Well, I think the answer to whether we've been able to answer those questions is an absolutely emphatic yes, although of course the answers will take a long time to completely complete. But I'm going to go through where I think we've made some real progress in this meeting, and more importantly where the avenues of progress look like they're shaping up. I'm going to define risk as the potential, in terms of the subjects we're worrying about, the potential for undesirable change or outcomes in the domain we're focusing on, of primarily natural cat risks. The benefit actually for us is that the KPIs, the key performance indicators for natural disasters, are fundamentally so easy. It's death, damage, or dislocation. At least we have such a clear focus of measuring success or failure. And what I've really picked up in this week is that the generic methodologies for confronting risk are fairly well understood. We deal with hazards, we deal with understanding exposure, dealing with vulnerabilities, and then the economic and other consequences. I think we've got a fairly well understood methodology. What I do pick up, however, is often that the hard sciences, the physics of climate, the engineering impacts on vulnerability, the hard sciences are sometimes actually the slightly easier ones. And actually some of our biggest challenges are in the softer sciences, of then understanding the economics of these impacts, or how do we affect cultural change. I think the soft sciences are often the harder sciences in some respects, and this is perhaps the biggest challenge that we'll have to overcome. But the real challenge is going to be applying these different these relatively, I think, agreed fundamental methodologies in the different contexts and scales, hazards that we have to deal with around the world. And that's where the real devil in the detail will be, and then critically linking it all up. That's where Ed will be able to help. How do we link up this work at different scales? But then the flip side is that risk is actually about choice. If we don't have choices, we don't have information, we don't have any risk. And that's the corollary. The more information we have, the more choices we have, the more risk we have. And people get worried about this. It was actually what Margarita was saying just a few moments ago. But actually, I think that we should take heart in the journey we've made in the last 300 or 400 years, since well, the Renaissance even, in the Enlightenment in the West and corresponding traditions elsewhere. That actually, the more information we have, ultimately we do gain a greater understanding. So just as I, as an insurer, have learnt to rely and have faith in reinsurance, I'm hoping that we perhaps will learn to have faith in the re-enlightenment, and maybe that is what this is all about. It's the Enlightenment version 2.0, perhaps. Thanks for laughing. Right. Okay, so what are the key themes? Well, one I think I expected to listen to, but it's been reinforced, is about modelling. Remember Anish Chopra, the White House technology advisor, who was right here just 2 days ago? I had a frisson of excitement when he said that one of the keystones of the new administration was modelling, visualization, and high-performance computing. This truly did excite me. But then he highlighted, actually, that the challenge is that the knowledge, the information, the understanding to actually apply all this is dispersed. It's fragmented, and one of the challenges is bringing it all together, and Ed sort of reinforced those themes. But clearly, throughout this 2 days, we've seen remarkable examples of how modelling is improving step by step in specific areas, but also linking up. So with no doubt we're going to be living in the modelled world, and that's the only real world that we can confront much of this work in. But I think what really reinforced or was highlighted for me was the importance of communication. Now, we've lived in a network world for some time, and the convolution of the modelled world and network world, I think many of us understand. Liberation of atomised data for the last 20 years, which is accelerating all the time. You combine that with advanced processing power. 20 years ago it was a spreadsheet, now it's a supercomputer, with generic ubiquitous networks, aka the internet, or the global synapse. We've all seen how that's coming together, and many of us work in that every day. I felt pretty comfortable, I knew that. But what's really struck me, and it came through so loudly and clearly in the Ignite sessions, the emphasis on mass participatory communication. Mass participatory communication, not just as providers of content, whether it's post-damage, but actually also as consumers of content. And clearly this is going to have a massive transformation in our worlds. I have no idea really what impact it will have on my rather backwater of insurance and reinsurance in the next 20 years. But I know it will. I don't think any of us can predict it, but what I do know is that actually if I hitch a wagon to the UR lifestyle choice, I will be at the heart of knowing of what is going on year by year. But I think this is the biggest enlightenment. From communication we move that we're confronting. I can't think of a bigger challenge that society faces, really, because dealing with catastrophes is at about a much bigger themes of climate change than others. But the beautiful thing is that it is a great collaborative environment, because none of us have to worry about the usual challenge of having enough slice of the cake. The cake is going to be huge. The key thing is, can we harness all the right ingredients, all the right people, and the method to actually bake the cake? We don't have to worry about, and the cake will be big enough for all of us. What is so refreshing, however, that the focus, the aim, is so clear, it can be so easily defined, that collaboration becomes possible. It doesn't become this blur of uncertainty about what the ultimate objective is. And I think that's what will make this work. Because without that focus, all the technology and the communication in the world can't be harnessed properly. Now, there isn't time, obviously, in the next 1 minute or 10 to talk about all the different ingredients I've seen or the methods this week. But I do think it's possible to highlight some of the really important elements. I will say the thing that struck me is we will need to collaborate at individual institutional level, but the real exciting thing is the collaboration that will occur at a sectoral level, between finance, between government, between other industries. And if you look at all the zeitgeist forces occurring in different sectors, if you just use the language of another sector, you can almost see that people are converging. And the real excitement about this subject is it requires that convergence and collaboration of different sectors. The bank is the ideal pivot for that collaboration, and I'll explain why. But before that, I want to offer a new definition or equation for sustainability. Those of us who listened to Ezio Dodini in the flood session were bamboozled by his equation, so I'm going to retaliate with a word equation. Sustainability is the avoidance or management of undesirable extremes within tolerable parameters. We could be talking about from poverty into mortality. We could be talking about financial stress becoming the extreme of bankruptcy. We could then talk about a state of environmental equilibrium being stressed to an extreme threshold change. I could talk to any of you about any of your work or any of your subject disciplines through the language of extremes. And actually that's what sustainability is all about. And it's obvious really. I was a geomorphologist for a little while. I studied geography at least. And got to be careful here. And actually I realised that natural landscapes are actually shaped by extreme events. You usually have extreme events and then millions of years of relative slow sort of erosion. But it's the extreme events that create the landscapes. And then you look at financial markets, and actually the winners and losers of the next 20 years will have been shaped by the extreme events of the last 2 years. And when we look at our own lives, it's actually the extreme events which shape us, the time we met our partner, being born, the negative things. Actually, it's all about extremes. But I think actually we as institutions, we've forgotten this. We sort of manage for normality. But that's not actually what's important. And that's the mental difference that I think we've got to overcome, both sometimes in our personal understanding as well as our professional ones. So I'm going to argue that the new way of thinking about delivering sustainability is actually a generic one. Delivering sustainability by managing extremes. And I think that's a tent which almost everyone can get under. And we will need almost everybody in this tent, from left and right, from private and public, from technical to untechnical, to solve this problem. So I'm now moving on to the next big fusion, which is between disaster risk and financial risk. And actually these two things are exactly the same, because as you know, financial markets at this very moment are going through a regulatory challenge to try and overcome and avoid extreme events. They call that financial security, but it's sustainability. And if we can unite the slightly sometimes perceived as mushy, sometimes from those who would be against this from the left, concept of sustainability, which is increasingly moving into the mainstream, and unite that with a very hard issue of financial security and realize that these two things are exactly the same, we will unify and harness a remarkable fusion of skills, resources and talent. And there is no one better to do that than this organisation. And I think you've done it. And I want to provide a rather parochial example of reinsurance. As insurance companies, as those of you who had to listen to me before, we have to be operated under our regulatory arrangements to tolerate the 1 in 200 year maximum probable loss. It can be from credit markets, it can be from investment markets, it can be from Mother Nature, it can be from operational risk, which is a code word for bad management. But that's how we have to operate. We're slightly unusual in doing that. It's unique in finance. Banks have actually only usually had to manage themselves to risk-return periods of less than 200 days, not 200 years. I mentioned it to a chap called Jean-Claude Trichet when he came to London a few weeks ago, and he couldn't believe that insurance companies were operating at that tolerance limit. But that's what they have to do. We don't always get it right, but that's the psyche that we increasingly have to operate on. And we do that inside of a modelled world, because the real world doesn't give you that ends of the tail of distribution. Now, wouldn't it be interesting if many other organisations, public, private, or institutions which had a duty of care, were also invited to organise themselves to meet those tolerance limits, if that was an appropriate tolerance limit for whatever they did? I think now is the perfect time to begin to explore that fusion, because the tools and techniques which have been used in that particular sector are utterly replicable, and this meeting has shown that. But I think there's actually a bigger opportunity for aid and development. Because maybe we should use this also, as I try and think of new tenets for insurance, how we use this to explore additional interpretations of the key tenets that perhaps have guided other institutions. We've all been entering this building in the last few days, and we'll all have seen the mission statement of the World Bank, which I think has been your mission statement for, is it 10 years? Please forgive me if I make a mistake, but I think it says, "Our dream is a world without poverty." And I think that's probably been quite an inspirational walk under the pillars for those of us who have seen it. But clearly, as we look around the world, there's quite still a lot of work to do, and we will have to keep dreaming for just a bit longer. But perhaps poverty, we should develop an additional or new definition or interpretation of what poverty means. Not just a lack of wealth or lack of resources or a lack of food or homelessness. But perhaps we should be more specific and say poverty means a vulnerability to extremes. Not just natural perils, but all sorts of extremes, health and all the rest of it. And if we did that, it might just reshape our actions and allow poverty to be alleviated, and focus on alleviating poverty by reducing exposure to undesirable extremes or increasing people's resilience. I know it's a slightly subtle change in philosophy, but perhaps it's a logical conclusion of some of the lessons we've learned from this event. And it does raise some fascinating questions about how we may wish to allocate and spend aid dollars or undertake other actions and interventions. But of course there's a much bigger journey that this meeting's all been about. It's been about actually a transformation of cultures and values and actually responsibilities. And actually I think it's been, the heart of this is about God. Not the God perhaps that we worship in whichever style we may, but about the generation of desire. We have to create the information to generate the desire for people to act, whether they're a farmer in Africa, a Wall Street banker, a government, or even us in our room. Because the real challenge is enabling and making people change their behaviour. And GOD is often at the root cause of the problems we face. So it's about changing attitudes, both as individuals, communities, companies, and indeed countries. So the first thing I want to say is, let's finally break down these ridiculous divides that we make between pure and applied, between public and private, between rich and poor, between here and there, between us and them. This meeting has done quite a bit of that, but we are not going to solve this problem if I occasionally have to keep seeking to absolve myself of being a private sector reinsurance broker, or anyone else in this room. Those days are gone. And the next phase is that it is all about culture, because governments and governments can pass all the laws they want, and financial regulators can create all the regulations we want. And actually, we as individuals can have all the New Year's resolutions we want. But actually, these are all worthless, utterly worthless, unless they're founded upon a bedrock of values, respect, responsibilities and duties that guide us. It becomes part of our DNA. I think most of us probably rule our lives by that sort of framework. Both in our professional and private spheres. It helps us judge what is right and wrong, good or bad, and all the rest of it. And it keeps us on the straight and narrow, and funnily enough, usually the reason that we don't do things is we feel that if we do them, and we do them wrong, it's not just we'll lose our job, or we will lose our wife, or whatever, but it'll just be we'll be rejected by the tribe. So David Ropiak, you are absolutely right. And these are very powerful forces, and if they're used properly and appropriately, they're the things that really govern behaviour. They can have negative consequences as well, but we've got to re-engender a certain set of core values and principles that we operate in both personal and professional life, on Wall Street and on Main Street or in Pennsylvania Avenue, that actually will make that happen. So actually, understanding risk is fundamentally about understanding responsibility. And just as we're in the midst of conforming to the disaster risk reduction here or in financial markets undergoing their own regulatory evolution, they all try and engineer enormous sets of rules. I'm sure there'll be huge reams of paper on financial regulation. I'm sure there'll be all sorts of models, and I know there are, that we will have to obey when we run our financial institutions. But I do hope that there is also a set of basic principles, or 10 principles, that will be reinforced that should fundamentally govern our behaviour and our responsibility. Because that could actually be as invaluable, or if not more valuable. And how interesting it would be if the same principles that govern, say, the operation of financial markets were quite similar to those same principles that govern sustainability, that governed how finance ministers should operate, or governed how those who run disaster risk reduction organisations should operate, or even the World Bank. Because fundamentally, that's the unification that we all need, and that's what will actually govern and allow us to sign up our behaviour. At heart, it's about duty. And I think we should move away perhaps from saying we should avoid risk and avoid or manage risk, because that sounds so distant. We should just take care. We should just take care of people, and take care of our institutions, and take care of our future. That's what surely this is all about. And that's, for me, what has been the biggest learning experience of this meeting. I have enjoyed a cultural enrichment, and that's what that meeting has brought. I've got, renewed hope. I feel there's an interesting tribe being formed, and I don't want to be rejected by it. But we do have a responsibility as a group of people, because it really is individually... The world is changed by individuals and relatively small teams. And there are 400 leaders in this room who fundamentally between them have the power to make this happen. There isn't another Google, there isn't another World Bank, there isn't another UNSDR, there isn't another, there's a very few big reinsurance companies like Munich Re here or Swiss Re. There isn't some other meeting that's going to happen, or some other group in some other place that's going to be an alternative to this. This is it. If we actually want to make this happen, it's really up to us. It is genuinely our responsibility as an individual and a group of people. So we have been set a fabulous challenge by Captain Guesqueri. I have no doubt that actually what's happened this week is that the ship has been loaded up. The ship's been loaded up with its key supplies and stores. It's got its crew. It's got its well, they're not really passengers. They're sort of working passengers. A course has been set There will be many interesting stops along the way, but this ship has sailed. And we must help it get to its destination, and that's the duty we have to each other. Thank you.